Kerinne. How's it going?
Pretty good, pretty good. Thank you for asking.
And you're a program manager, right?
Yes, I'm a senior program manager in our customer experience and engineering team.
Yeah.
And yeah, what we do is we pretty much help customers deploy Azure Security Center.
Wow. And that's what you're going to talk about today, correct? Azure Security Center?
Yes, Azure Security Center and some pretty cool ways that you can use the product to improve your security posture in Azure.
Awesome. That sounds awesome. Let's get started.
Sure. Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. And Lex, thank you so much for having me. So today we're going to talk about Azure Security Center, and my name is Kerinne Brown. So today's topics are a little different. We have a few topics about Security Center and Secure Score, but also how Azure Security Center can help improve your security posture and how to communicate action items with other members of your team. So, who's involved in helping Azure Security Center become a success? And then also some reporting. So, how do you get reports out of Azure Security Center? And how are some ways that we can leverage automation to really help bring it all together? So, we're going to recap a bit before we jump into it. So, what is hybrid cloud? And hybrid cloud really requires a new approach to security. So, today, most organizations are facing a few challenges. We have personnel resources that are limited, we have increasingly sophisticated attacks, and we also have security skills that are in short supply. So, attacks on organizations are becoming more prevalent, especially since technology is changing. And organizations may sometimes have a hard time keeping up with what's actually going on in their environment. Personnel resources are limited as well. So, for example, you may have someone on the SecOps team, but they're not only responsible for security, they're responsible for the infrastructure as well. So, knowing what to focus on and how to divide their time can be challenging at times. So, we're going to talk through some ways as to how Azure Security Center can help with that, as well as how to protect your cloud. So, before we get into that, we'll talk about why security hygiene should be your top priority. And these snippets actually give a pretty good example of what is causing the vulnerabilities on some systems. So, the first one in the upper left-hand corner talks about cyber hygiene fail, how unpatched vulnerabilities drive data breaches. Apparently, 60% of organizations that experience a data breach, it's usually because of an unpatched vulnerability. In the bottom left-hand corner, the truth is that a majority of data breaches can be prevented with basic actions, such as vulnerability assessments, patching, and proper configurations. And on the right, 37% of organizations have suffered a cyber attack on cloud environments, again, due to the lack of security hygiene. So what this slide is saying, it's not that SecOps teams and infrastructure teams are not doing their job. It's just sometimes that they miss some things. And Azure Security Center is a great tool to help you figure out what it is that you're missing, and then we'll give you some steps as to how you can work through that and patch those vulnerabilities. So threat actors, how do they gain access to your environment? Well, there's an exposure. From an exposure, they get access. After they get access, they perform some form of lateral movement. And then there's some actions to your data. So let's use an example of a work from home scenario. So a user is in the office and they decide to take their machine home for the rest of the week. Well, when they get home, they connect to their home network and they continue to do their work. Well, remember that vulnerability, it could be something that as simple as a vulnerability like an infected admin, open entry ports, some exposed credentials, etc. It could be a host of different things. From there, if the attacker gained access through any of those means, they now have access. So they have access to virtual machines. Let's just say the user that went home is connecting to some other virtual machines on the network, or they're using applications or something like that. The attacker now has access to whatever the user was using. And then from there, the attacker performs other actions through lateral movement, which is moving across the environment. So from a virtual machine, they can have access to another virtual machine, more applications, access to different types of credentials, not just the user's credentials, data stores, etc. And then from there, they take an action. And what are some of those actions? It can be data loss, data exfiltration, ransomware. I mean, there are a lot of different things that can happen in an environment because of an exposure. So Azure Security Center has two main functions. The first function is to strengthen your security posture through cloud security posture management using SecureScore or policies and compliance. And then the second piece of that is protecting against threats for your servers, for your cloud native workloads, and for databases in storage. And when we put both of these together, we allow you to get secure faster. So how do we help you improve your security posture? Well, we have SecureScore. So what is this SecureScore thing? SecureScore is a measurement of an organization's security posture. So a higher number indicates a lower risk. For example, on the right, we have a few pictures of the overall secure score and then the secure score across the different subscriptions in an environment. With the secure score, each subscription is rated on a system of 60 points. So 60 points would equal to 100%. In this particular example, we have 52%, or this subscription has 31 out of the available 60 points. So what does this mean? Enabling security teams to report to a CISO on their security posture is super important. And SecureScore, by giving a percentage, an actual number that you can quantify, allows security teams to actually report that number up to the CISO or whomever they report to, and actually use it as a KPI. Security teams are able to compare and establish organizational security postures using the different secure scores across their subscriptions. So now subscription owners have insight into their individual subscriptions, as well as the security team can see what's going on in the environment as a whole.
That's pretty cool. So let me interrupt for just a second.
Sure.
So is Secure Score rolled out right now?
Yes, it is. It is
Okay.
available in the portal today.
Okay. And it only runs against their Azure infrastructure?
Oh, it's a great question. So Azure Security Center, it does support on-prem resources as well. How we do that is through a log analytics agent that is installed on the machines, and then the agent will then collect data and report up to Azure Security Center.
Okay, so that makes sense. So they install an agent locally, even on their on-prem systems.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you for
Okay.
asking that.
Yep.
Awesome. So with that, the Secure Score definitely gives a comprehensive overview of your environment, your on-prem resources, and your resources in Azure. So let's talk more about security posture management. So there are a few different key features that you can say contribute to having a great security posture. First thing is the Security Center's policy. So we have Azure Security Center controls that are available by default, and I'll talk more about the controls in a few different slides. You have the ability to add custom policies. So any policies that your organizations are using, you can put them in Azure Security Center and adjust the baseline of the product. It also provides visibility to resources health. Azure Security Center assesses your resources continuously. And again, it definitely points out those misconfigurations or those vulnerabilities that you may have. You can also monitor the security status, such as ASC prioritizing the items for you already. And again, it gives you that score and shows you what you need to fix. It allows you to remediate and prevent. So there's bulk remediation, and the policies are there to prevent misconfigurations. Not only that, we have workflow automation, which allows Azure Security Center to use logic apps that have already been created to perform actions against those recommendations or those security alerts. And then we have reporting and exporting. Azure Security Center provides reports about your environment, and you can export some of those capabilities. So we have the default security policy. As I mentioned in a previous slide, it's continuously assessing the environment. Well, it's the default security policy that does that. It's easy, out-of-the-box onboarding because it's built in. As soon as you click on the portal in Azure Security Center is literally starting to assess your environment, and it's running those policies against your subscriptions, right, and your on-prem resources, and getting that score for you. Again, the policies are in audit mode, so they're checking for those misconfigurations. Now, if there's some controls or recommendations that may not be relevant to your organization, you can definitely customize and disable the ones that are not relevant to you. So there's a lot of flexibility with this product. If you were to click on the portal today, how would you locate your secure score? Well, once you get into the portal, it's right underneath policy and compliance. So under coverage, you have secure score. It may or may not say preview next to it, but that is where you would locate your secure score.
So I've got another question for you. Is this something, so under policy and compliance, you've got secure score here. Does that mean that this automatically runs against my Azure portal? Do I have to do anything special to run it against the machines that are in my Azure portal?
Great question. No, it is doing it all by itself. It is built in. So once you click on it, your secure score will be calculated for you.
Okay. And if I want to include my on-prem machines, then I can install the agent on the on-prem boxes.
Yes. Within the product itself, it can either automatically install the agents for you, or you can install them on your own.
Okay. All right. Pretty cool.
I know, it's awesome. So here are some of the controls that I mentioned earlier. And there are a few of them. There are 15 to be exact. So now we have the policy is represented as some of the security controls that I mentioned previously. So what is a control? A control describes an activity that needs to be addressed to mitigate security risk. So on the right, I'll walk through some of those controls. We have remediate vulnerabilities, secure your management ports, enable encryption at rest. Moving further down the list, applying system updates, apply data classification, encrypting data in transit, and enabling MFA or multi-factor authentication. Now, your environment may look a little different, which is totally fine. Everyone's environment is expected to look a little different, so they may not be in this order. What we've done is organize the controls by impact to secure score. So here we can see that underneath the potential score increase, remediate vulnerabilities has the highest impact to your secure score. If you were to remediate all of the recommendations underneath that, you would get a total of your 6 points or 9% added to your secure score. So here's a list of all of the secure score controls and their maximum scores. So enable multi-factor authentication, a max score of 10 points. Securing your management ports, 8 points. Applying system updates, 6 points. And it ranges all the way down to additional best practices, 0 points, which those are just some things that you should keep in mind.
Wow. They're
I
not
know.
very high value.
Well, by the time you've worked through all of the other recommendations, you should be okay with the additional best practices.
Yeah,
But
no, I get it.
Yeah.
I just think it's
Included in
funny
there.
that they award 0 points for that.
Yeah. We'll just make sure
I
everyone.
mean, why even have it on the list if you're going to award 0 points, right?
You could say that. It's more like certain things that people tend to forget about. So it's more like make sure that you do this, almost like a mini to-do list, right? So it's just almost like additional things to think about. So, but most of the time, by remediating a lot of the recommendations, you should be okay with the additional best practices. So What we have is the maximum score. It reflects the importance to solve the misconfiguration. And as I mentioned previously, the overall maximum score is 60 points. If you have 60 points, your secure score is 100%. Now, some of you may open the portal today and notice that it is not 60 points. Some of your subscriptions may be less than 60, maybe 59, it may be 51, it could be 40%. That's actually normal. And it's because somewhere along the line, there were those policies that I mentioned in the default policy that may have been turned off, either in Azure policy or within the product. Maybe someone got into Azure Security Center before you did. It's totally fine. So what I would recommend is, one, don't freak out. And two, definitely go back into the default policy and just see what may have been disabled. And if you find that it was disabled incorrectly, feel free to re-enable it. It's totally fine. So here are some of the calculations in understanding your secure score. So we have a maximum score. So the score, as I mentioned, it's about 10 points or so. And then we have your potential increase. So the remaining points available to you within the control, again, to get all of those points, you must remediate all of the control's recommendations. And then you have your current score, which details the points that you've gained so far. So again, for those of you that have already been using the product for a while, your current experience looks like the one on the left, which I'm sorry, a while ago, it looked like the one on the left. And then now we have the enhanced experience. It is GA, and it looks like the image on the right. So we have the percentages, the unhealthy resources, and then the recommendations underneath the controls. And we have the new score. Okay, so how do we customize policy? As I mentioned previously, we do have the ability to add custom initiatives. An initiative is a group of policies. You can add a custom initiative into Azure Security Center by going to Security Policy and then clicking on your custom initiatives. So yeah, you can just add your own policies. How do you use Azure Secure Score or Azure Security Center Secure Score as your secure KPI? So what we're doing here is, again, as I mentioned, you have a maximum score of 100%. And then as your secure score goes up, the actual recommendations that you have will decrease because you've worked through some of those. So you will get your points. And then your security posture is enhanced. It's literally that simple. So now we're going to talk a bit about governance and why it's important. So we have governance, which is how do we ensure that our, you could say, resources in Azure do not affect our secure score. So what that looks like is, let's just say in September, your secure score was 57%. And then in November, for some reason, it dropped to 23%. Well, why did that happen? It was because new VMs were provisioned or new storage accounts were provisioned. Actually, it could be a host of many different things, but something happened, some new resources were added, and the secure score dropped because they're not compliant, right? They have recommendations that need to be worked through. So a really good way to not chase secure score is to have some form of governance. Again, you can use Azure policy to ensure that resources are compliant before they're deployed, and that way it'll prevent your secure score from decreasing. Okay, so how else can we increase your score using automation? Well, as I mentioned, we have Azure policy or some form of policy enforcement. So we have code, right? Code that we are looking to implement. We can build it or test it. And we can also have policy as code. So we have pre-flight, validation, and authoring. So it's really assessing the environment, figuring out what exactly it is that we want our resources to abide by, and then writing the policy or whatever that looks like, and then deploying it in the environment. And then that will lead to more operational efficiency. So we have a few different pieces. We have monitoring, we have security, and then we have policy. And through Azure DevOps and Azure Policy, that is where those two things meet to give you the policy enforcement that you're looking for to not chase that secure score. You can also enforce remediation. As I mentioned, you can prevent misconfigurations by enforcing, a secure configuration on those new or those changed resources. Well, again, you can use deny or deploy if not exist Azure policies, or you can take a stab at it by looking through our Azure Security Center GitHub repo and clicking around and looking at some of the policies that some of my teammates may have already put in there for you. So I definitely recommend looking at the GitHub repo. And again, in the product itself, we do have a community page that takes you to the GitHub repo, so you don't have to search for it on your own. So you can automate your configuration. You can run remediation through ARM templates or PowerShell. So for those of you that really like looking at some form of code and really seeing what's going on in your environment, again, PowerShell's not necessarily code, but it's really good. And one thing that this slide is showing is that on the bottom left-hand corner of the image, it says view remediation logic. For some of the recommendations that we have, we do provide the remediation logic for you. So you can see exactly what Azure Security Center is doing, like the actions that it would take. And then you can actually copy this code out, make some changes to it, and create your own form of remediation, right? We didn't hide anything. We definitely wanted everyone to see what's going on and also provide them some examples that they can work from, as well as those that are in the community.
That's pretty cool. And you said that was just PowerShell?
You can use PowerShell, you can use ARM templates, you can use a few different things to assist with that.
See, yeah. That's code.
I know most people don't think of it as code. They hear code and they get a little
They
nervous.
think C#.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, PowerShell's code. PowerShell's pretty cool, actually. You can script just about anything, and I love PowerShell.
Maybe one day you can teach me some more PowerShell.
Oh, challenge accepted.
All right, sounds good. So, since we're talking about code, do you know much about logic apps? Are you good at logic apps as well?
I know nothing about logic apps.
Okay, I can work with that. So I'll actually talk about what they are and how they can help in Azure Security Center to get you and everyone else that isn't familiar with logic apps a little bit more familiar with it. Totally fine. I do hear that a lot. So we do have the workflow automation that I mentioned earlier, which is using a logic app to trigger remediation. So what does that look like? We have a trigger condition. So that could be a recommendation, right? Or it can be a security alert within the threat detection or threat protection piece of Azure Security Center. And then we have an action that we can take. So you can use your own scripts and run through the workflow automation when a recommendation fires. So as an example of that is you can install a Qualys extension using the workflow automation. So here we have a list of workflow automations that are in the environment, but on the right, this is where we're actually tying it all together. So as I mentioned previously, you would have had to have created the logic app already, and then you would go into the portal, into workflow automation and tie it together. So here, what we're looking at is we have to name our workflow automation, give it a description if you so choose your subscription, your resource group, and then we have the trigger condition. So here we're looking at Security Center's recommendations. We're selecting a recommendation name, so we can choose individual recommendations, or we can choose all recommendations. And then below that, we can choose severities, etc. And then below that, you would select the actual logic app that you want to tie to the workflow automation. And then once that trigger condition is triggered, it will run those action steps. How was that for a mini intro?
Well,
To
that was
workflow
awesome.
automation and logic
Yeah,
apps?
that's awesome. I do have one more question for you, and you might touch
Sure.
on it later on in the slides, but is there a cost for this for the customer?
Yes, there is a cost. We do have two tiers of Azure Security Center. The first tier is the free tier, and the second tier is the standard tier. So as you choose to get, you can say comfortable with Azure Security Center, you can use the free tier because it's by subscription, per subscription. So you can have some subscriptions on the free tier, some subscriptions on the standard tier. With the standard tier, you do get the threat detection and the regulatory compliance and all those other really cool features such as JIT or just-in-time access. With the free tier, you're actually not getting all of that. You're getting the secure score, of course. So you're getting those recommendations and you're getting one or two more features. But the standard tier is definitely where a lot of the advanced features are.
Okay, but they can get a basic score just for free.
Yes, they
Okay.
can. Yeah. So what I've seen in my experience is sometimes the dev and lab subscriptions may be on the free tier, and then you have more of the production subscriptions on the standard tier. That's what I've seen, but I highly recommend that you try to have as many subscriptions as possible. Of course, within reason, right? You're choosing on the standard tier just for those additional features and for the threat detection, because you don't get that with
Yeah.
the free tier. And so those dev subscriptions and those lab subscriptions, sometimes they can fall to the wayside sometimes. And that's where, they're more vulnerable, and attackers tend to assume that they're in an environment which we don't want, but they tend to focus on those, right? Those subscriptions or those resources that are not paid attention to too often. And so, yeah, I mean, of course, it's definitely up to you. You decide. You can mix and match as much as you like, but there are a few differences there.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
Sure. So within the product, we do have quick fixes or quick fix remediations. So what that is it's really just we've pointed out the recommendations that you can take action against from within the Azure Security Center console. So literally, you would click on a quick fix, it will show you the resources, and then it will take you right through either the wizard or it will fix it right then and there once you click on the remediate button, and you would have then remediated that particular recommendation. So not all of them have quick fixes next to them. Some of them require some manual I guess you say manual work, really. So for example, like disk encryption, right? We're Azure Security Center is not going to encrypt the disks for you, right? That may not be a good thing. So that would be one that, someone on the infrastructure team or SecOps team, if they do that as well, they can go in and enable the disk encryption. And that is actually using Azure disk encryption or ADE. Just throwing that out there in case you're curious. So that's definitely one that requires some form of manual steps, not from the console, as well as the monitoring agent health issue should be resolved. So you're going to actually go to the machines that may have that agent health issue, and you can restart the agent or whatnot, whatever actions you see feasible. We pretty much leave it up to you to decide which you want to do that. But the recommendation will still be there until it's remediated. So here's an example of what that process looks like. So we have the recommendation of secure transfer to storage accounts should be enabled. And then we have the score, the impact, the threats that it's actually protecting against, right? So once you work through this recommendation, you will have prevented these particular resources from data exfiltration, data spillage, and threat resistance. So here we can select on those particular resources, and then we can click on the remediate button. It will ask you, yes, are these the resources that you sure that you want to remediate against? And then you would click on remediate the 2 resources. So that is our quick fix. Okay, so being that Azure Security Center is not a one-person job, at least from what I've seen, how do we communicate action items to some of the application owners? Well, a few different ways. And we're going back to workflow automation and logic apps. So what I've noticed is, again, because I work with a lot of the security teams, they don't often have permissions to perform the remediation, and which is perfectly fine, right? So we can use that workflow automation, but we're using it differently this time. Instead of actually taking an action against the recommendation, we're using it to create or launch some type of a workflow. So either in ServiceNow or Azure DevOps, we're using it to notify stakeholders this time about something in Azure Security Center. It could be an email, it could be something posted to the Teams channel, whatever have you, you can actually decide that here. So this first image, it says when an Azure Security Center recommendation is triggered or created, this is a snippet of a logic app, and it allows you to use a step, which is send an email. So we're connecting through Outlook, and then we're saying, please show the recommendation, the display name of the recommendation, access the URL of that recommendation, and then please visit the page to see the affected workload and or the resources. And then the subject is new recommendation, and we're sending it to Susan, and the importance is high. So that is how we are notifying others that something needs to happen in Azure Security Center. And then again, remember, once the logic app is created, we would then go to workflow automation and tie it all together. So now we have something in our description. It says workflow automation for, again, the secure transfer to storage account should be enabled recommendation. The owner is Susan. We've actually filled in all of those fields that are required. And then once we select everything and we look it over and it looks amazing, we're going to click on create. So there are 2 different ways you can use the workflow automation, which is awesome. You can use it to fix recommendations and security alerts, or you can use it to send or create tickets for others. Cool. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
Very,
cool.
very flexible. Okay. Reporting in Azure Security Center. This is a question that I get asked a lot. So hopefully this provides some tips and tricks as to how to get your data out of Azure Security Center or into something else, because technically it's not leaving, it's just going into another area. So you can export your settings to either a log analytics workspace or Event Hub to build your own reports. You can use CSV, that as well. And as I mentioned, LA, log analytics, and Event Hub, and you have the options of your security recommendations underneath exported data types, or you can use security alerts. Actually, you can do both, to be honest. You can use either one, or you can do both at the same time. And then for this particular image, we're under the log analytics workspace. So you just specify the workspace that you would like it to be sent to, and that's where your data will reside. And then you can go and run queries against the log analytics workspace and pull some data or run reports that way. Like I said, you can build your own reports, but you can just take the data, literally put it somewhere else, and then have a lot more fun with it using KQL queries. So this is an example of the log analytics workspace that I mentioned. So we're in log analytics for our cybersecurity demo. We wrote a KQL query looking specifically for security recommendations at time generated by the recommendations. And then it gave us a wonderful list of all of the recommendations that we found based upon the query that we wrote. And then we can, from there, decide exactly what we want to do. So this one is looking for recommendations within the last 24 hours. And as I mentioned, you can correlate it with additional data, so alerts on machines, or you can build a Power BI report, which that has been coming up a lot more now. How do you build a Power BI report? Or I have customers where they're interested in building Power BI reports, and we have one that has actually have a lot of Power BI reports, and they're having a lot of fun with it. So I definitely think it's another way to display data in other areas outside of Azure Security Center. And we encourage you to create some reports. All right. So we also have ARG, or Azure Resource Graph, to query ASC data. Again, real similar. You can export it to a CSV, create an Azure workbook, or you can use the API to pull data, send data, etc. It's pretty cool because it's a really comprehensive view of what you have in Azure. So again, it's Azure Resource Graph. It's not specific to Azure Security Center. It's literally everything that you have in Azure. So there's a lot of, it's a very powerful product, and, or I should say tool, and you can do a lot of really good things with this. So for example, this query is showing security resources, where the type is Microsoft Security Assessments. And then we added some additional properties onto it. And then we summarized the count. And then we looked for a display name. And then here we have our actual recommendations from Azure Security Center. And we have like the count, and it's providing you with additional details so you can dig in some more. So again, another way to look at the information and literally get a lot more specific and granular, if you so choose. Okay, so what do we do with all this information? Well, I would say become familiar with Microsoft's offerings. Like, know your stance on your governance, compliance, and security cloud. Really, we spoke a little bit about it. So we spoke about governance using Azure DevOps and Azure Policy. We spoke about compliance, same thing, Azure DevOps, Azure Policy, and using the recommendations. And that's really just becoming familiar with those aspects of it. And then ask your TAM to add Azure Security Center offerings to your service delivery plan. We do have an offering for Azure Security Center, and I know that the TAM's name is changing, so it may be something else, but you still have an account manager.
CSAM, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Customer Success Account Manager.
Awesome. Ask your CSAM to add the offerings to the delivery plan. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And definitely share your experiences with your CSAM. We would love to know how successful you've been using our products, and we love the feedback. And another thing that I didn't mention is feedback is really important, because another thing that our team does is we interact directly with like the developers of ASC, right? So we take the learnings from our customers and we turn that into actionable items, or like such as, for example, a feature request, and then we send it over to the dev team. And we do that because we definitely want to make your experience better with the product, and we just really love hearing from you guys on, what you love and some of the things that you would love to see improved, right? And so we may add that to our backlog, and you may see something that you suggested in the product a couple months down the road. So definitely we would love to just hear, all the wonderful things that Azure Security Center has helped you with. And then the second piece of that is, if you're interested in being like a case study, there's also that option as well. Again, just let us know, and we can help you with that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty cool.
I know. It's just, yeah, I really enjoy that part of the role. I actually love my role, but the fact that we can take feedback from our customers and turn it into a feature request and actually see it being like written into the product is just like an amazing feeling, right?
Yeah, and the workshop that you're about to talk about, I think I actually have booked for my customers, so this is pretty cool.
Awesome. This is exciting. I would love to hear how this goes.
Well,
Actually,
so we had it booked, and then I don't know when if you're watching this podcast, I don't know when you're watching it, of course, but right now we're in the middle of the COVID-19 thing, and so delivery of this has been postponed, but I can't wait. And I'll certainly report back to you about how they liked it, what they thought of the workshop.
yes, it's awesome. And sometimes we're asked to contribute to the workshop contents. So, you never know. I may have written something or someone else on my team may have written something. So you're getting the most up-to-date information as possible in these workshops. So this one is Azure Security Center Fundamentals. It's a 4-day engagement, and it, of course, goes into way more detail than what I covered with Azure Security Center, but it helps you gain an understanding of the security state across your workloads or providing education on Azure Security Center. And because we're using your data, right, as opposed to like a My Lab environment or something, we're giving you realistic scenarios using your data so that way you can actually use more features, or you can actually go in there and start digging around and just doing some cool stuff. And again, we're giving you deeper insights into your workloads and talking about all the benefits, and you have like the person that's delivering that like right there with you, so you can ask questions. Of course, you can
Yeah,
ask questions
yeah,
as well,
absolutely.
but
Yeah.
yeah, you have someone there that you can definitely, run questions by, or, anything that you're thinking about. Really
Yeah.
cool stuff.
Yeah, cool.
And we do have some additional resources. So we have our Azure Security Center documentation, which I think most people are familiar with, docs.microsoft.com. Of course, Azure Security Center. And then we also have our tech community. So our tech community is where most of our blogs live. It's different from the community in Azure Security Center. The community in Azure Security Center is more sample based. So if you're looking for like different policies or logic apps and stuff, that's where you would go. But this tech community is definitely blog based. So there's some pretty cool blogs up there. I've written 3 in the last couple of months about Azure Security Center. So what the controls mean and why they're important, and how to actually look through, what was that one? Remediating vulnerabilities. Yeah, really cool stuff up there.
Yeah. Wow, this is really cool. I'm psyched.
Well, you're going to be even more psyched when we start talking about teamwork.
Okay.
So, as I mentioned, the security team, again, they don't always have their permissions to do things in Azure Security Center. So we have, or I recommend that there are a few different groups that are usually involved. And we have the compliance and governance team, we have the security and SecOps team, and then we have the infrastructure team. So this is actually where I get like super excited, because usually when we start involving like these teams in our Azure Security Center conversations, it's like the light bulb comes on. They're like, oh, this is so cool. Like, okay, got it. Yeah, I'll definitely help out. Or I didn't even know that we had this product available to us, or I didn't know that we had these recommendations. Yeah, I'll totally get on it. So we definitely need like these teams involved. And then we have remediation and analysis paralysis. So I hear this a lot. You open the portal in Azure Security Center and you see all this stuff and you're not really sure where to start, especially when it comes to the recommendations. So with that, I would like you to be reassured that recommendations are written by the respective product groups. So if you have SQL recommendations, any types of the virtual machine recommendations, literally any recommendation in there, it's written by that respective product group. So where the best practices are coming from them, right? So they are the experts on that particular product. And so they are responsible for creating those recommendations and pretty much giving you that guidance. So just so you know, we collaborate across the company to ensure the best recommendations are provided. We also have Microsoft resources available to help. We have our consulting services, our cybersecurity solutions group, which I believe has changed as well due to the reorg. And then we, of course, have my team as well, which is the customer experience and engineering team. So the next piece of that is, I know sometimes there could be a lot of recommendations underneath the security control. It's perfectly fine. Pick 1 to 2 security controls per week or per 2 weeks and involve the one or more of the other teams that I just mentioned and create a plan for next steps. Do not be afraid to click around in the console. Again, as you click on the recommendations, it's okay. Like, we give you the remediation steps. You don't, once you click on anything, you're not performing an action until you actually click on the blue buttons, whether it says remediate or anything like that. So definitely click around. You're not going to break anything. You're not going to change anything unless you actually want to. And then set a deadline for the remediation. So the teams are agreeing on when X, Y, and Z should be remediated. And also be sure to provide enough time so that if any questions come up, Microsoft can help, right? So don't be afraid to reach out, say, hey, I'm working on this security control. Can you provide me some guidance? We're here for you, right? If you happen to reach out or ask someone else, they'll point you in the right direction. It's totally fine. And then we also have a reference guide, again, at docs.microsoft.com to talk about like the recommendations. So all of the recommendations that could be possibly generated by Azure Security Center with their explanations. Thank you so much. It was definitely a pleasure talking about Azure Security Center. And thank you, Lex, for having me.
Oh, listen, this was awesome. I really learned a lot, and hopefully our viewers will as well. It was great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Well, guys, that's it for this episode. That's your taste of Premiere.